They said her father left her nothing, but in the old barn she discovered a buried safe. What she found inside turned her whole life upside down. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching this video from. The road stretched endlessly through the barren Texas countryside, a ribbon of asphalt slicing through fields gone golden and brittle under months of heat. Amara Jackson gripped the steering wheel of the rental car until her knuckles whitened, her gaze shifting between the horizon and the nearly forgotten property pinpointed on her phone's navigation app. The engine hummed, the tires whispered over cracked pavement, but inside her chest a heavier noise churned, a tangled storm of grief, fear, and the uneasy sensation that she was driving straight into a past she had long since tried to abandon. The air grew drier the deeper she traveled into the rural county of her childhood, carrying the faint scent of dust and distance, as if the land itself exhaled memories she had spent years suppressing. The ranch appeared just as the sun angled lower, casting soaked amber light across the open stretches of grassland. The property sign, once painted in bright letters she used to trace with her small fingers, now sagged and peeled, half swallowed by weeds. She slowed the car and stared out the window at the sight that should have felt familiar but instead struck her like an accusation. The fencing leaned crookedly, sections missing entirely, and the main gate hung ajar as though broken long ago and never repaired. She pulled into the drive, feeling the jostle of uneven dirt beneath the tires, and killed the engine, listening to its ticking fade into the quiet of the countryside. The farmhouse stood before her, stubborn against ruin. Its white paint, now more gray than anything, flaked off in curling strips. Window frames darkened with age stared like hollow eyes. The porch boards sagged but held just barely. The place that once felt like the whole world to her now felt like a place the world had forgotten. A plastic chair sat knocked over on the porch, brittle and sun-bleached. For a moment, she could almost see her father sitting there as he once had every evening, his broad shoulders relaxed after a long day's labor, the dying light outlining his silhouette. She swallowed hard and stepped out of the car. The breeze nudged her braids against her shoulders, carrying with it a distant echo of childhood laughter. Hers, shrill and joyful. His, low and infectious. But that was another life. A life before she chose the city over the soil that had raised her. A life before their conversations dwindled into brief calls and awkward silences. A life before hospitals and the sudden, lonely burial she arrived too late to stop. Amara walked slowly toward the porch, feeling the fragile boards give under her steps. She unlocked the front door and entered the house as though trespassing in a stranger's home. The air inside was stale, tinged with sawdust and old tobacco. Dust blanketed the living room surfaces, except for one neat stack of envelopes on the coffee table. Bank statements, overdue bills, foreclosure warnings. The thick red lettering made her stomach twist. They had told her this was all he left behind. Debt and a burden no one wanted. She tried to imagine her father living here alone, his strong hands, once capable of taming wild cattle and coaxing stubborn soil into harvest, reduced to sorting bills he could never fully pay. She had been so sure he would always scrape through, always find a way. He had survived droughts and bad seasons before. But reality was silent and sharp and staring her in the face. He hadn't made it this time. Her cousins arrived that afternoon like a gust of unwelcome wind. 3 SUVs full of loud voices and louder opinions. They roamed the property with critical eyes, shaking their heads at the dilapidated structures. Amara stood aside while they muttered about demolition, auctions, and whatever quick cash they could squeeze from the wreckage of her father's life. One cousin clapped her shoulder with forced sympathy, reminding her again how lucky she was that at least the land was now hers, though everyone knew no one wanted to buy this remote stretch of earth. Another suggested she sell it right away and put all this behind her. She ignored the hints dripping with greed, the thinly veiled desire to see her gone so they could circle back like vultures if anything changed. She smiled through clenched teeth until they finally left, engines revving away down the road, leaving her again in aching quiet. She returned inside and thumbed through the stack of bills, scanning dates. Many were recent, too recent. Some were stamped only a week before he died. How could he possibly still be making payments on anything when everyone swore he was completely broke? Her frown deepened when she noticed a few receipts tucked beneath the pile. Hardware store purchases for lumber and bolts, dates circling the last months of his life. If he was drowning in debt, why was he repairing this broken place? Hours passed as she wandered the rooms, uncovering traces of meticulous maintenance among the decay. Tools organized on a wall pegboard, some new, a fresh set of hinges on a kitchen cabinet. In the barn, visible through the back windows, a new padlock gleamed silver against rotted wood. Nothing aligned with the narrative she'd been fed about a man losing everything. Near dusk, she discovered a notebook on his nightstand. Its pages were filled with untidy scrawl, phrases like, "They won't take this land from us," and "I'm running out of time." Words like evidence and fight and truth, repeated with increasing desperation. The more she turned the pages, the more a strange chill wound through her. Her father had been afraid of something real enough that he documented it carefully yet never shared it with her. A sudden metallic groan startled her. She moved to the front window and peeked through dusty curtains. The ranch's main gate was shifting as though pushed from outside. Car headlights flared, sweeping across the yard. A dark truck sat momentarily, engine rumbling. Her breath caught. She couldn't see the driver through the glare, but she felt the weight of unseen eyes staring up at the house. No one got lost this far out. You only came here if you meant to. Just as quickly as it appeared, the truck pulled away, tires crunching gravel as it drove off into the settling darkness. Amara stood frozen long after the lights vanished, listening for any hint of a return. She finally exhaled and turned from the window, though suspicion clung to her thoughts like burrs. She told herself it was nothing, just a curious passerby, yet deep in her chest a warning pulse drummed. She flicked on the small lamp beside the sofa. Its soft glow barely stretched beyond its own shadow, leaving the corners of the room drenched in gloom. Amara sat, drawing her knees close, reviewing what she knew. The ranch was supposedly worthless. Her father supposedly had nothing. His body was barely cold, and already people were circling like sharks. But the repairs, the purchases, the secrecy, they whispered another truth entirely. She looked toward the barn through the back window, its silhouette stark against the moonlit yard. Something waited there. Something that did not match the story she had been told. The silence swelled again around her, heavy but expectant, as though the house itself waited to see what she would do next. She curled into the sofa, but sleep eluded her. Instead, she lay alert beneath the low creaks and sighs of settling wood and the restless ticking of her own thoughts. A father she barely recognized at the end had left her more questions than answers, and now the weight of the unknown pressed down with startling urgency. Hours later, drifting at the edge of uneasy sleep, she jolted upright as a distant door groaned somewhere on the property. A slow, deliberate sound, too heavy to be the wind. Her heartbeat surged, ears straining. When silence resumed, thicker than before, she whispered into the empty darkness, not expecting any answer but certain something in the night was listening. By morning, exhaustion hung behind her eyes, but resolve had taken root in her mind. She would not leave. She would not surrender the land. And she would not accept the story that her father had died with nothing. The barn, with its fresh lock and patched beams, awaited her. Something in that worn structure held the key to everything he had hidden, everything he had fought for, everything he had died trying to protect. Amara stepped onto the porch as the sun crested the horizon, lighting the ranch with a pale promise. This was her home now, broken, battered, and full of secrets. And she was done pretending she didn't want to know them. She looked once more at the barn. Today, she would uncover its truths. The story of her father and of this land was buried beneath dust and deception. But she had returned. And whether she had the strength for it or not, she would dig. Morning light crept over the horizon, washing the ranch in a gentler shade of gold than the night before. Amara stood in the kitchen, staring into a chipped mug of coffee that tasted like dust and bitterness, but gave her hands something warm to cling to. Every muscle ached from sleep that had been shallow as a puddle. The memory of the truck passing through the night lingered in her thoughts like a dark stain refusing to fade. She set the mug down, drew a breath, and turned toward the back door. The barn waited. She sensed that whatever her father had hidden in his final days lay within those walls, something he didn't trust anyone else to find. The padlock on the barn door gleamed as she crossed the brittle grass, the morning breeze rustling through weeds that brushed against her jeans. It was a cheap lock, but new, which made it stand out even more against splintered boards and rusted hinges. Her father had purchased it recently, far too recently for a man supposedly out of money. She rifled through the ring of keys she found in his kitchen drawer. Most were old and worn, tags long faded by time, but one looked newer than the rest. She held her breath as she slid it into the lock. A clean click sounded, startlingly loud in the hush of morning. Her pulse quickened as she removed the lock and pulled open the heavy door. It groaned in protest, as though something inside resisted her presence. Dust motes danced through beams of sunlight as they pierced cracks in the roof. The scent of oil, hay, and old wood filled her nose. She took cautious steps forward, her boots stirring dust and small scraps of grain across the dirt floor. The barn was larger inside than she remembered. In her childhood it had been a place of warmth. Horses shifting in their stalls, her father humming tunelessly as he brushed manes and tightened saddle straps. Now it felt cold, stripped of life and purpose, but not of secrets. She scanned the interior. Some corners were untouched by time, a neatly coiled rope, sharpened tools arranged carefully, a new length of chain hanging from a peg. The details were subtle, but undeniable. Someone, her father, had been working in here long after the rest of the ranch fell into ruin. Her eyes fell to the far side of the barn. The boards of the floor there were a different shade, lacking the thick dust that covered the rest. She walked toward them slowly, sensing that the room itself was watching her every move. The floorboards creaked beneath her weight. She knelt and brushed the surface with her hand, fingertips tracing the outline of nails that still shone silver instead of dark rust. A corner of wood felt loose. Before she could investigate further, the floor beneath her left foot suddenly shifted. The wood splintered with a sharp crack, and her leg plunged downward into darkness. Pain shot up her shin as she yelped, trying to yank her leg free. Her fingers clawed the boards, heart hammering in panic. She pulled herself backward and collapsed onto the remaining solid floor, gasping as she stared at the hole she had just created. Splinters stuck out like jagged teeth, framing disturbed earth below. Coughing dust, Amara crawled closer and peered down. The soil looked fresh, damp even, unlike the dry crust covering the rest of the barn. Her father had buried something here. Recently. Adrenaline fueled her movements as she located a shovel leaning against the nearest stall. Its handle was smooth, as though used often. She returned to the damaged section of floor and began prying boards away, widening the opening. Sweat pricked her brow despite the morning chill. The boards finally gave way, exposing a rectangle of loose earth roughly the size of a trunk. She dug. The shovel sliced easily into soft soil. Each heap and mound she threw aside revealed more clues. The ground had been turned and tamped down not long ago. She imagined her father, alone at night, shoveling desperately in the dim glow of a single work lamp, racing against time. After 10 minutes of digging, the shovel struck something solid. The dull metallic thud reverberated up the handle and into her bones. She knelt and brushed away dirt with trembling hands. A surface emerged. Cold metal painted a faded army green. Panic and excitement tangled inside her chest. She cleared more soil, revealing a corner, an edge, and eventually the unmistakable shape of a safe. It was heavy-duty, reinforced steel, with 3 combination dials across the front and thick hinges still gleaming with fresh oil. This wasn't some family keepsake or cheap lockbox. This was the kind of safe used by banks or mining companies decades ago, built to protect anything worth killing for. Her father had buried it for a reason. Amara sat back on her heels, breathing hard, staring at the impossible sight as though it might vanish if she blinked too long. What had he been involved in? What had he been hiding? The world she thought she understood slipped further away the longer she stared. The safe seemed to stare back. She wiped sweat and dirt from her brow, inspected the dials. There was no obvious clue, no note taped to the top, no key in sight. But she remembered the notebook in his room filled with frantic notes and scribbled reminders. Her father had been obsessed in his final months. Maybe obsessed enough to leave hints only she could understand. Her first guess was her birthday. She twisted the dial slowly, trying not to hope too much. Nothing happened. Then, her mother's birthday. Still nothing. The date he bought the ranch. She barely remembered it, but if her father had been the one to set the lock, surely the land he fought so hard to keep would matter. She dialed in the numbers carefully, heart in her throat. Still, the safe remained stubbornly shut. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine him. Tried to remember the things that had mattered to him beyond bills and land, and the hard life that had worn him down. He had been a man of stories, old tales told around cattle fires, history carried in quiet verses under the stars. He cared about family legacy, about justice, about promises made by those who were no longer living. Perhaps the code wasn't a simple date at all. She leaned closer, tracing her fingers along the surface. Then she saw something she had missed, 3 tiny scratches carved into the metal beside each dial. She thought at first they were random scuffs, but when she brushed them clean, they were unmistakable marks. Not numbers, not letters. Roman numerals. IVX 1, 5, 10, years, ages, something personal, something she should know but couldn't yet grasp. Exhaustion overtook her. She sat down, legs dangling into the shallow hole, resting her hands on the cool edge of the safe. Her father had left her his greatest secret, buried in a barn floor, and she didn't yet understand how to unlock it. A sudden sound made her flinch. Gravel crunched outside. Heavy, slow footsteps neared the barn. Someone else was here. She scrambled to her feet, dust clinging to her jeans, racing to sweep pieces of wood over the disturbed ground. But the gap was too big, the safe too exposed. She stood frozen, heart galloping painfully, hands shaking as she brushed soil across the metal in a futile attempt to conceal it. The barn door groaned open. Harsh sunlight flooded in, framing a silhouette she could not immediately distinguish. Time slowed, air stilled, and fear coiled tight in her gut. She expected the faceless threat from the dark truck, some enforcer, some shadow of the corporation that had hovered unseen yet hostile. But it wasn't a stranger. It was Sage Whitman. Sage, who had worked with her father for years on the ranch before disappearing from their lives without an explanation. His broad shoulders filled the doorway. His face was worn, eyes shadowed with something she could not name. As he stepped inside, his gaze dropped to the dirt-covered safe at her feet, then lifted slowly to meet hers. The silence between them stretched until her pulse thundered in her ears. Sage's voice, when it came, was low and weighted. "So," he murmured, "you found it." Her breath caught, and before she could form a single question, she saw understanding, no, fear, flash across his face. He knew what the safe was. He knew why her father had buried it. And he knew exactly how dangerous it was that she had uncovered it. Amara's world tilted further into uncertainty as Sage stepped closer, his boots pressing into the dirt like he belonged here, like he had always known this day would come. Everything she thought she knew about her father, about the ranch, about the life she had walked away from, was unraveling thread by thread. And Sage Whitman, standing in the sunlight with secrets etched into the lines of his face, was about to pull the next one loose. The safe waited between them, silent and heavy, like a heart that had not yet begun to beat. The air inside the barn thickened with tension as Sage stepped nearer, boots pressing small craters into the loosened dirt. Amara's pulse roared in her ears, each beat a warning. She braced herself, every muscle taut, ready to defend the half-buried safe if she had to. Sage didn't rush. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze steady but troubled, as though he was looking not only at the safe but at a future neither of them wanted. "You shouldn't have come back alone," he finally said, his voice low and gravel rough. He wasn't angry, not exactly, but his tone carried a weight of inevitability, as though the moment they now stood in had been silently approaching for years. Amara swallowed the tightness in her throat. "Seems like I didn't have much of a choice," she said, nodding toward the mess around them. "Everyone made it clear there was nothing left here for me. Except this." Her gesture at the safe was sharp, accusatory. "So what is it, Sage? What was my father doing that he didn't want anyone to know?" For a moment, he didn't answer. He crouched beside the safe and brushed away dirt she hadn't managed to hide. His fingers lingered on the Roman numerals beside each dial. The movement was almost tender, a familiarity that told her he had been here before, that this safe had once had a place above ground and within reach instead of buried like a body in the dark soil. "He was supposed to tell you," Sage said quietly. "Before he ran out of time." Amara stiffened. The thought sharpened her grief into anger. "He could have told me a lot of things, but he didn't." Sage's eyes met hers with a complicated glimmer, guilt, fear, loyalty that hadn't died with her father. He pushed himself to his feet, wiped dirt from his hands onto jeans stained from years of ranch work. The familiar gesture sparked memories. Sage helping her learn to ride a horse. Sage lifting her high to pick apples from the tree in the yard. Sage disappearing from their lives when the ranch grew quiet and the debts mounted. "You need to hear the truth," he said, "but not here, not with this," his nod toward the safe, sitting open for anyone watching. That last word stung her senses. Watching. She heard the crunch of late-night tires, the slow roll of that truck through darkness. The house had felt observed. Now the barn felt monitored too. She crossed her arms. "Then you'd better start talking because someone was here last night. Maybe they're coming back." Sage tensed, scanning the door, his shoulders rising as though he expected a threat to step through at any second. "They know he's gone," he said, "and when they come for what he found, they'll come fast. They won't knock." Fear rooted cold in Amara's spine, but she forced it down. Fear wouldn't get her answers. "So, what did he find?" she demanded, voice steadier than she felt. Sage hesitated. Then his expression shifted. Resolve overtaken reluctance. He took a breath, as though crossing a threshold. "Your father wasn't broke, Amara. He wasn't losing the ranch because he failed. He was losing it because he succeeded." The words sank in slowly, like oil spreading across water. She stared at him, confusion battling with sudden, urgent hope. Succeeded at what? All anyone ever told me was that he made bad deals and the land dried up. "No," Sage said, and for the first time certainty underlined every syllable. "He found proof. Proof that the corporation buying up farms around here has been using fraud and intimidation for decades. Proof they stole land that belonged to families like yours, like ours. Families that built this county long before those men in suits ever set foot on it." He moved around the safe, pacing as though the truth itself burned too hot to hold still. "Your father spent years digging into old land records, property transfers, court rulings that never should have happened. He collected every lie they told to force people out. The bribes, the forged appraisals, the false debts." His voice darkened, heavy with memory. "When they realized someone was tracking them, they came after him, cut his access to credit, made every bank say no, pressured the county to reassess his land as worthless so his taxes would bury him alive." Amara's mouth went dry. She pictured her father sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills that screamed failure, while outside he hammered new boards into the barn he refused to abandon. She had thought he was too proud to ask for help. Now she wondered whether he had been too hunted. Sage crouched again and tapped the surface of the safe. Everything they stole from these families, names, dates, signatures, evidence, it's in here. This is enough to take them to court and win. Silence thickened between them. Amara took it in, letting every revelation settle into place. Her father hadn't died poor. He had died fighting, and this barn had been his battlefield. Before she could speak, Sage pulled something from his jacket pocket. A second notebook, small and worn, edges curled like it had lived in a back pocket through countless storms. He flipped it open to a page filled with columns of numbers, initials, and abbreviations that meant nothing to her. "Your father trusted me," Sage said, his voice lower now, almost fragile. "I helped gather some of the documentation. I held on to what he couldn't risk keeping here. He always planned to show you when the time was right." Bitterness rose hot in Amara's throat. And what? He just ran out of time? Died before he could make me understand why I wasn't enough to be let in on the truth? Sage flinched as though struck. It wasn't about you not being enough, he said. It was about you being the only thing he had left. He wanted to protect you from all this until he could finish the fight. The tremor in his words cracked her defenses. A flicker of grief, real, raw, rippled through her chest. She turned away to steady herself, blinking against the sting behind her eyes. The barn suddenly felt too small, the air too thin to breathe. When she looked back, Sage was staring at the door again, face tightened. "We can't stay here," he murmured. "If they know you're back, and trust me, they do, they'll come for the safe next." Amara's instinct snapped like a trap. "We're not taking it anywhere until I know how to open it." Sage nodded, but his voice urged speed. "Your father said the combination is something only family would know, something personal." Her gaze drifted to the scratched Roman numerals. IVX 1, 5, 10. Her heart knocked hard against bone as memories leapt forward. Her father's voice singing goofy birthday songs. His joke about her being his #1 girl. Her 5th birthday party. 5 candles exactly, no more. The 10 silver dollars he had promised for when she turned 10, though he could only afford 1. Before she questioned it, she knelt and spun the first dial to 1, the second to 5, the third to 10. Each click sounded like thunder in the stillness. She wrapped her hand around the handle and pulled. The safe opened with a clunk that echoed like a gunshot. Inside, beneath the neat stacks of documents and envelopes stuffed with receipts, lay canvas bags filled with silver nuggets that glinted in the morning light. Her breath caught. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, enough to buy back the ranch 10 times over, enough to change everything. But Sage wasn't looking at the silver. He reached for a leather portfolio packed thick with papers and maps. "This is the real gold," he whispered. "With this, we can expose the whole network, show exactly how they took the land away." As his fingers brushed the folder, a shout rang outside. "Open the door! Step outside with your hands visible, now!" Amara's blood froze. Heavy footsteps, boots, the unmistakable thud of authority approaching. Sage slammed the safe door halfway shut, blocking the silver but leaving the paperwork visible. "Federal agents," he whispered urgently. "They'll seize everything as evidence and bury it in bureaucracy. Years of legal wrangling while the corporation continues with business as usual. That's what your father feared." The barn rattled as fists pounded against the entrance. "Last warning." Sage grabbed the portfolio and thrust it into her arms. "There's a second location," he said quickly, breath sharp. "My place. The room I built because your father insisted on a contingency plan." Another blow struck the door, the wood groaning under the assault. Amara felt adrenaline surge, turning fear into fire. She didn't need further convincing. She hugged the documents tight and allowed Sage to lead her toward the back of the barn, where loose boards shielded a narrow gap just wide enough for a desperate escape. They slipped out just as the barn doors crashed open behind them. Shouts erupted, flashlights cut through shadows. Dirt sprayed under the rapid footfalls of agents sweeping the room. Amara and Sage crouched behind stacked equipment, breaths shallow and synchronized. In the distance, Sage's truck sat beyond a shed, half hidden beneath dusty tarps. They had a chance, but only if they moved now. "No matter what happens next," Sage whispered, eyes locked on hers, "you need to understand something. Your father didn't die defeated. He left you the means to finish what he started." His hand squeezed her shoulder, grounding her in the chaos. She nodded once, fiercely, and they bolted toward the truck, running through the fading remnants of morning calm into the widening jaws of a story much larger than either had ever prepared for. the barn behind them filled with agents, flashlights slicing through the dust and secrets left behind. The safe remained open, just enough proof waiting in silence for the reckoning that had finally begun. The road unspooled beneath the truck's tires like a strip of worn ribbon, the ranch shrinking behind them into the haze of dust and sun. Amara kept glancing back through the rear window, half expecting to see the convoy of government vehicles erupting out of the property in pursuit. But the barn and house remained small and silent in the distance, just two forgotten structures etched against the horizon. Sage drove without turning on the headlights, coasting with the engine barely above idle as he guided the vehicle down a narrow dirt road that wound like a secret. It was a practiced route. She could tell by the certainty in the way his hands moved across the wheel, by the lack of hesitation when the path forked and twisted. Her heart still pounded from the escape. The weight of the leather portfolio pressed against her rib cage under her arm, the edges digging into her skin every time the truck hit a rut. She clutched it like a lifeline because that was exactly what it had become. The proof her father had lived and fought and refused to fall quietly. The proof that could change everything. Sage kept his eyes forward as the truck finally merged onto a barely paved road, leading them toward a small town 20 miles north. It wasn't a town she recognized. Lights were sparse. Houses huddled behind thick trees, hidden from the world. And at the very edge of the settlement stood Sage's home, a single-story structure with a sagging porch and a corrugated steel roof that gleamed silver in the sun. It looked like any other house of someone who worked hard every day and didn't waste money on things that didn't matter. Deceptively ordinary. Sage cut the engine, and the sudden silence was jarring. They remained still for a moment, breath catching up with adrenaline. Then he stepped out and motioned her inside through the back door. The house smelled faintly of cedar and coffee grounds. Amara followed as he led her through a narrow hallway toward a staircase that descended into a basement, the walls lined with concrete and cold pipework. Downstairs, the concrete gave way to something unexpected. A hidden room, tucked behind a wall that swung open once Sage pressed his hand against a certain brick. Lights flickered on, illuminating rows of file cabinets and a massive metal safe bolted into the floor. A folding table sat at the center, a wide map of the county pinned under a pane of glass, colored markers denoting parcels of land, numbers scrawled in corners, lines drawn between properties like a web that bound everything together. "This is where your father worked with me," Sage said, voice roughened by memory. "He kept the most sensitive information here in case anything happened to the ranch." Amara ran her hand over the table. She saw labels, farm names she recognized from her childhood, old family friends whose lands no longer belonged to them. She saw red X's marking properties she knew had been lost years ago. Each mark was a wound. "He knew they'd come for him eventually," Sage continued. "He wasn't afraid to fight, but he was afraid to leave you with nothing if he lost." Her throat tightened as she remembered those late-night calls, his quiet voice telling her not to worry, insisting he was fine. He had been preparing for war, and she had been too far away to see the battlefield. Sage opened the leather portfolio she had carried from the ranch and laid out the contents. Geological surveys, notarized statements, contracts that were clearly forged or coerced. Her father had collected everything with meticulous detail, every underhanded tactic the corporation used to swallow land. The scale of it stole her breath. "Why go after black farmers specifically?" she asked, voice breaking. "Because we were easy targets," Sage replied. "Land handed down orally, paperwork lost or never issued properly decades ago, banks that didn't trust us, courts that ignored us. They counted on our roots being shallow enough to yank up without resistance. "But my father resisted," Amara whispered. "He did," Sage said, "and he paid the price." She stepped back and pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed by the weight of the truth. Her father's fight was larger than their family, larger than the ranch. He had been trying to save history itself. They spent hours sorting, reading, scanning what her father left behind. The air in the hidden room seemed to grow thicker as the web of corruption unraveled beneath their hands. Amara found letters from families she remembered as smiling faces at barbecues or Christmas gatherings, now reduced to shaky signatures pleading for help. She found records of sudden land seizures, crops destroyed under false claims of disease, tax bills inflated beyond any reasonable amount. She found the truth her father had died with, the truth his enemies wanted buried before it saw the light of court. A knock thundered upstairs, shaking the beams overhead. Amara jumped, adrenaline flooding anew. Sage motioned for silence and climbed the stairs slowly, finger pressed to his lips. The knock came again, stronger this time, followed by a voice calling his name. She recognized the tone, urgent but not hostile. Sage opened the door just enough to peek out. "Lydia," he breathed in relief, stepping aside. A woman entered, tall and composed, dressed in a fitted jacket and worn boots that suggested she was ready for both business and trouble. Her sharp eyes took in the basement door before settling on Amara. "You're Theodore Jackson's daughter," she said, offering a hand. "Lydia Myers. I work with a legal organization dedicated to protecting minority landowners in rural areas." It wasn't the comforting introduction it might have been in a different life, but here, now, it felt like the first real help. Amara managed a nod as she shook the woman's hand. "I've been trying to reach your father for months," Lydia added. "He told Sage he'd bring you to us when it was safe." Her gaze softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss." Amara swallowed hard. "He wanted to protect me," she murmured. "Then he did," Lydia said. "You're here, and you have the evidence he died gathering." They returned downstairs together, and Lydia examined everything spread out on the table. Her expression shifted from curiosity to fury as she connected dots Amara had only begun to understand. "This is enough to topple a corporation," Lydia said, "and enough to make them very desperate." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and cursed under her breath. "The county just fast-tracked a foreclosure hearing on your ranch for tomorrow morning. Completely illegal." Amara's stomach dropped. "They're trying to take the land before we can prove anything." "That's exactly what they're doing," Lydia said. "They want this buried, permanently." Sage's jaw clenched. "We can't let that happen." Lydia nodded firmly. "We'll move for an injunction with what we have so far. It's not everything, but it's enough to make a judge hesitate." Before they could discuss further, the house suddenly went dark. The basement lights fizzled out, plunging them into hungry shadows. Lydia's head snapped up. "Power cut?" Amara's chest tightened with dread. They were found. Sage grabbed a flashlight from a shelf and switched it on with a sharp click. "Utilities don't just go out in this neighborhood," he muttered. "Not unless someone wants them to." Above them, footsteps creaked across the porch. Slow, deliberate. The unmistakable sound of someone testing the front door. Lydia's voice was barely audible. "They moved faster than I thought." The first heavy blow from outside rattled the frame of the house. Amara looked toward the stairs, instinct screaming to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The safe room was secure, but not impenetrable, and if they broke in— Sage stepped toward the main basement light switch, flipping the panel to activate emergency lamps. Small battery lights flickered on, casting eerie glows that deepened every shadow. The pounding at the front door intensified, wood cracking beneath the force. "We have to secure the documents," Lydia hissed. "If they get their hands on this, everything is over." Amara scrambled to gather pages, hands shaking. The weight of her father's legacy pressed down on her like a storm. It was no longer just a matter of inheritance. It was survival, not just for her, but for everyone whose history lived inside those files. The door upstairs finally splintered. Voices barked orders, flashlights cut through the dark. The invasion had begun. Sage shoved the rest of the documents into the basement safe and spun the heavy dial. The clatter of boots thundered closer. Lydia motioned for silence, her body tense like a drawn bowstring. For a moment, the three of them froze, caught between fight and flight, fear and defiance. Amara thought of her father alone in that ranch house, fighting as long as he could before death stole his chance to see justice done. The walls around her pulsed with memory, his determination, his sacrifice. No more running. Sage grasped Amara's shoulder and whispered, "No matter what happens, remember, your father chose you to finish this." The basement door burst open. Light flooded down the stairs. Armed figures descended like shadows come to life. Amara squeezed her eyes shut as the truth roared through her veins. This was no longer a mystery. It was a war. And she had just become its leader. The air seemed to disappear from the room the moment the armed figures burst into the basement. Their flashlights sliced through the dim emergency glow, blinding Amara as she instinctively pressed back against the concrete wall. Lydia stepped in front of her without hesitation, her arm outstretched like a human shield. Sage tensed, poised to fight though hopelessly outmatched. Boots thundered down the narrow stairs, each step echoing the closing of a trap that had been set long before any of them realized they were prey. But then something unexpected happened. The agents did not storm further into the safe room. They froze at the threshold, a voice barking from behind them to hold position. A tall man in a black jacket stepped forward, his badge glinting faintly. He surveyed the three of them with sharp scrutiny, his gaze lingering longest on Amara. His expression was unreadable, stern but not hostile. He raised a hand and the agents lowered their weapons only slightly, enough to reduce the threat but not remove it. "Miss Jackson," the agent spoke, his tone formal, rehearsed. "We are here to secure evidence related to ongoing federal investigations of land fraud and unreported financial assets. We have reason to believe this property contains material relevant to those investigations." Lydia didn't budge. She spoke with icy calm. "You have no warrant. You are trespassing and interfering with legal counsel." The agent's jaw tightened. "We have probable cause." "But not a warrant," Lydia repeated, her voice steel. "And without one, every step you take deeper into this room becomes a violation of constitutional protections. You may observe from there. You may not seize anything without judicial authorization." A tense silence followed. The agent knew she was right. Lydia stood taller, ensuring the proof of her authority radiated from every breath she took. The law was her armor, and she wore it well. After a long moment, the agent nodded curtly. "We will station 2 officers outside the premises while we request formal approval." He turned his head slightly, signaling his team to retreat up the stairs, though not far enough for comfort. "Do not attempt to flee," he warned. "That would be a mistake." When they disappeared, leaving the basement door open as a symbol of both surveillance and threat, Amara finally breathed again. Her legs trembled beneath her. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold concrete, the truth of what had just happened pounding through her veins. "They're scared," Lydia said, adjusting her jacket, though her own breath was uneven. "They wouldn't have moved this quickly if they weren't threatened by the evidence we have. They want to shut this down before it explodes beyond their control." Sage locked the hidden door, knowing it would only buy a little time. "We need to move the material again," he said, "somewhere safer, somewhere they wouldn't think to look." Amara pressed her palms to her eyes. "How do we fight both a corporation and the government at the same time?" "You don't fight them alone," Lydia replied. "You rally people whose stories were stolen. You turn the buried truth into a weapon too big to crush quietly." Her voice softened as she knelt beside Amara. "Your father already lit the match. You're here to carry the fire." Amara didn't feel like fire. She felt like ash, trembling, brittle, but beneath the fear, something newly awakened pulsed inside her. A spark. A memory of her father's stubborn resilience. He had fought every day to save the land his ancestors bled for. Now she finally understood that the burden had been a shield he held up for generations he intended to protect. She wasn't letting that shield fall. With newfound resolve, she stood again. "We move everything tonight." They spent the next hours scanning documents into encrypted drives. Sage loaded files into bags lined with protective seals. Lydia coordinated backup copies to be stored across multiple states with trusted legal allies. Every page preserved turned the looming threat into something less intimidating, because information secured could not be burned or buried. But the fight became personal in a new and painful way when Amara's phone lit up with a barrage of messages. Family group chat notifications chiming angrily into the dim room. "Why are there cops at the ranch? Sell the land, Amara. This is madness. You're going to ruin all of us. What did your father get you into you need to stop before you end up like him?" The last message made her blood run cold. It came from a number she didn't recognize. "Leave while you can." He didn't, and look what happened. She stared at the screen, chills crawling up her arms. Lydia leaned over to read the message, her face darkening. "They're watching every angle. They're trying to break your resolve." Sage's expression spoke volumes. Anger, guilt, determination. "We don't respond," he said. "We keep working." Amara nodded, but the warning seeped into her bones. The truth of it was written in the fear that had taken her father's sleep, his peace, his life. The forces against him could crush anyone who dared resist. Yet, here she was, resisting anyway. Time blurred into the steady rustle of papers, the glow of screen light, hushed exchanges of strategy. They worked through the night, and as dawn approached, the basement looked more organized than when they first arrived. The gloom had not lifted entirely, but it had shifted. No longer the darkness of ignorance, but the darkness before battle. Sage carried the last of the sorted evidence to the safe, his footsteps heavy. Lydia snapped her laptop shut and rubbed weary eyes. Amara stood, stretching her aching limbs. Only when she looked up at the staircase did she realize the footsteps above had returned. Someone was pacing the house again. Sage cursed under his breath. "They're still here." Lydia pressed a hand to Amara's shoulder. "This is intimidation, nothing more." But intimidation was not harmless. It wore at the nerves. It reminded them that every breath they drew was monitored by people who did not want the truth to breathe. Hours later, once the federal agents finally cleared with their warrant denied for the moment, Lydia ushered the group out of the house. They drove in separate cars to avoid being tailed easily. Lydia to the courthouse to file emergency motions, Sage to meet with community organizers who had long whispered about the injustices buried in this land. Amara drove back to the ranch alone. The land rolled toward her like a promise, dry grass waving under a rising sun that painted everything with the illusion of hope. Yet, the closer she got, the more that hope twisted into dread. She parked near the porch and stepped out slowly, scanning for movement. The ranch stood quiet, but her senses, sharp as razor wire, told her she wasn't truly alone. The front door was ajar. Her heart pounded. She reached into her pocket, gripping her father's old folding knife. She approached the house and pushed the door gently. It creaked open, revealing the chaos inside. The living room was tossed, papers shredded across the floor, furniture overturned. Someone had searched everything with violent impatience. A vandal's calling card, a warning. Something glinted on the kitchen counter, a small metal emblem depicting the corporate logo she now recognized too well. It gleamed like a snake's eye. She picked it up with trembling fingers. Not an accident. A signature. She sank into the chair her father once used while sorting bills. Tears blurred the room around her. Anger rose hot, fierce. They had invaded the last personal sanctuary her father left behind. They had defiled it to send her a message. We reached him. We will reach you. She clenched the emblem until its edges dug painfully into her palm. Not without a fight, she whispered. Later that afternoon, Lydia arrived with a stack of legal filings as thick as a dictionary. The injunction request was in motion, granting them temporary ability to halt foreclosure, and Sage returned with names. Dozens of families who were ready to stand in court and demand justice. Amara listened to the stories of these people, voices cracked by exhaustion but strengthened by solidarity. They spoke of land stolen, dreams crushed, ancestors betrayed. They described her father as a man who arrived with a notebook and hope when no one else did. He believed in us, one elderly farmer said on the phone, his voice trembling. He didn't let the world tell him we belonged anywhere but here. Amara wiped her cheeks. Her father hadn't fought for himself. He had fought for all of them, and they hadn't forgotten him. That night, for the first time since she returned home, the ranch didn't feel like a place of endings. It felt like a beginning, raw, unstable, and charged with purpose. Yet quiet terror still lingered like smoke after a fire. She had seen too clearly what their enemies were capable of, and she knew the worst was far from over. Amara stood on the porch under a sweeping night sky, stars burning overhead like ancient witnesses. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the scent of earth and season and legacy. She imagined her father standing beside her, pride warming his smile. She wished she had come home sooner. She wished she could hear him say that everything would be all right. But she realized something in that silence. He had already told her what she needed to know. In every record he saved, in every board he repaired, in every secret he buried for her to uncover. He had told her to finish what he started, and if she had to sacrifice peace for justice, she would. If she had to stand in the path of the same storm that consumed him, she would stand taller, because she was not alone anymore. Tomorrow they would take the first step into court, and the enemy's world would begin to shake. Morning arrived without gentleness, dragging a heavy gray sky across the plains as though the world itself anticipated the fight to come. Amara stood at the ranch's porch with a thermos of bitter coffee in hand, staring at the horizon where the courthouse lay miles away. Her nerves thrummed like struck wire. Behind her, the house remained in disarray, its ransacked rooms a reminder of the nightmarish intrusion she could not forget. Every overturned chair and shredded paper still lingered in her mind, a testament to how far her opponents were willing to go. Yet, instead of breaking her resolve, the violation hardened it into something fierce and immovable. Lydia arrived just after sunrise, stepping out of her car with 2 overstuffed briefcases and the kind of grim determination that told Amara she had not slept at all. Sage pulled up minutes later, his truck coated in a thin layer of dust from county back roads he had likely used to avoid unwanted attention. He carried a heavy binder tucked under his arm, a patchwork of testimonies, notarized statements, and hand-drawn maps from the farmers he had met the day before. As he walked up the porch steps, he gave Amara a slow nod, a silent vow that whatever happened today, they would face it together. "Ready?" Lydia asked, adjusting her glasses and looking Amara over with sharp, assessing eyes. "No," Amara admitted, exhaling shakily, "but I'm going anyway." "That's the right answer," Lydia replied. The 3 of them climbed into their separate vehicles and drove the long stretch of road toward the county courthouse. The town emerged from the rolling fields like a stubborn relic, its old brick buildings weathered by decades of sun and wind. Yet today, the courthouse plaza hummed with unusual life. Cars lined the streets, people gathered on the steps, voices rose and fell like a distant tide. Word of the hearing had spread fast, faster than anyone expected. Reporters with handheld cameras hovered near the entrance, sensing potential scandal. Farmers, local families, and curious townsfolk lingered in clusters, their whispers filling the air with electricity. When Amara stepped out of her car, conversations faltered. Heads turned. Some faces reflected sympathy, others suspicion, others a mixture of fear and admiration. She walked through the crowd with Lydia and Sage flanking her like protective walls. The steps felt heavier with every stride. Her father had never walked into this courthouse as anything other than a man fighting for breath. She would walk in as someone determined to reclaim the breath that had been stolen from him. Inside, the courthouse smelled of paper, old wood, and cold dust. The floor tiles gleamed from decades of footsteps wearing them smooth. They entered the courtroom, a rectangular chamber with pew-like benches, a raised judge's bench, and tall windows that drew in muted daylight. The atmosphere felt charged, coiled. The corporation's legal team was already present, seated at the opposing table. Their suits were expensive, their expressions polished into smirks of confidence. One of them, a man with silver-framed glasses and an unsettlingly calm demeanor, watched Amara the way predators observed prey. She recognized him from the emblem left on her kitchen counter. Realization hit her with an almost physical force. Whoever ransacked her ranch worked for the people now staring her down across the courtroom. A hand touched her arm gently. It was Sage, steadying her before the anger could break her composure. Lydia whispered, "Let them underestimate you. It will be their first mistake." The judge entered, calling the session to order. Everyone rose, then settled. The hearing began with procedural statements, but the formality did little to calm the storm building behind Amara's ribs. When Lydia stood and addressed the court, her voice carried the clarity of a cut diamond. "Your Honor, we are here because my client has been targeted with a fraudulent foreclosure attempt accelerated without due process. We have evidence of systemic illegal actions by a corporate entity that has exploited minority landowners for decades, and we seek temporary injunction to halt foreclosure until a full investigation can be conducted." The opposing counsel countered with smooth confidence. Your Honor, the foreclosure is purely administrative. The corporation has followed all legal procedures. We are here only because Miss Jackson is attempting to delay lawful actions with baseless accusations. Lydia laid the first stack of documents on the table. The sound echoed like the drop of a hammer. These are land transfer histories showing irregularities, repeated patterns of coercion, and fraudulent appraisals linked to your client. This is inadmissible speculation, the corporation's attorney retorted. We request dismissal. The judge interrupted him sharply. I decide admissibility, not you. Lydia continued, sliding forward sworn statements from multiple farmers. These testimonies detail threats, harassment, and deception executed by agents of the corporation to force the sale of land that should never have been relinquished. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, studying the stack with furrowed brows. The corporation's attorney attempted to mask his unease, but his tightened jaw betrayed him. And finally, Lydia said, lifting the leather portfolio Amara carried from the storm of federal agents and danger. This is documentation meticulously gathered by Theodore Jackson, landowner, community advocate, and father of my client. These records reveal a coordinated campaign of property theft, concealed under false debt and manipulated court rulings. The corporation's attorney sprang to his feet. Objection. These documents may be stolen or fabricated. We demand they be entered only after verification. They have already been verified, Lydia said coldly, by independent legal experts, by historic land registries, and by members of this community who have lived the consequences firsthand. The judge's expression shifted, no longer merely attentive but wary. The weight of the evidence pressed like gravity against the room. The corporation's attorney glanced at his team, and for the first time, their professional facade cracked with visible concern. Amara felt her heart slam against her ribs as Lydia gestured toward her. Your Honor, my client would like to address the court. A hush fell over the courtroom. Amara rose, her legs steadier than she expected. She stepped before the judge and took a breath that tasted of sweat, fear, and raw determination. My father wasn't a criminal, she began, voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. He didn't lose his land because he was irresponsible. He lost it because people with power decided that families like mine didn't deserve to keep what we built. My father spent the final years of his life gathering proof. Proof that the truth matters. And proof that the people who built this county have rights. Rights that can't be erased by intimidation or lies. Her voice caught, but she pushed on, looking directly at the attorney whose emblem was left like a threat in her kitchen. Someone broke into my home to scare me, to silence me. But I'm here, and I won't be silent. Not for my father, not for the other families, and not for myself. If the court believes this evidence deserves to be heard, then I ask you to stop the foreclosure and let justice be done. When she sat, Sage placed a firm hand over hers. The courtroom was so quiet she could hear the ticking of an old wall clock. The judge inhaled deeply and steepled his fingers. Given the volume and seriousness of the evidence presented, I'm granting a temporary injunction stopping all foreclosure actions against Miss Jackson's property. Additionally, I'm ordering an independent review of the corporation's land acquisition practices within this county over the past 20 years. A gasp swept through the benches like a wave. The corporation's attorneys erupted in protest, their polished calm shattered. The judge silenced them with a raised hand. And, in light of allegations of harassment and intimidation, I am authorizing an immediate protective order for Miss Jackson. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck with finality, and the sound seemed to echo through Amara's bones, vibrating with the realization that they had won the first battle. Not the war, but the first meaningful strike against the force that had loomed over her family for generations. As they left the courthouse, reporters surged toward them, cameras flashing, voices overlapping in frantic questions. Lydia handled them with brief statements while Sage acted as a barrier, guiding Amara through the crush of bodies. The farmers who had come to watch approached her with gratitude, shaking her hand, hugging her, calling her father a hero. But when she looked across the plaza, she saw him again, the man with the silver-framed glasses. He stood with arms folded, his expression unreadable. No anger, no fear, just the cold calculation of someone adjusting his strategy. Their eyes met. He smiled. The message hit her hard. This is far from over. Lydia noticed and stepped in front of her view. "You did incredibly well today, but be prepared. They don't lose gracefully." The rest of the day unfolded in a blur of interviews, legal filings, and community meetings. Yet the victory in court had sparked something powerful. People who had suffered in silence now stood with renewed courage, willing to speak publicly, willing to fight. What had once been her father's isolated struggle was growing into a movement. By evening, Amara returned to the ranch. The sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. She stepped out of the car, exhaustion settling deep into her limbs, but something felt different. The land felt lighter, as though some invisible weight had been lifted, even if only a fraction. She inhaled the scent of soil and grass and dusk, and for the first time since she came home, she felt hope rising. She walked toward the barn, the place where the truth had first clawed its way back to life. The broken boards still lay scattered. The hole where the safe once hid looked strangely peaceful. She crouched down, touching the earth her father had turned with his own hands. "You weren't alone," she whispered. "You never were." Above her, the early night sky glittered with stars, each one a witness to the road she had stepped onto. The fight ahead loomed like a long, dark stretch of highway, but she no longer feared traveling it. Every step she took now was a step her father had carved out before her. Tomorrow they would strategize again. Tomorrow the corporation would strike back. Tomorrow more truth would bleed into the light. But tonight she allowed herself something precious, a moment of peace, a breath of triumph. She straightened and turned toward the house, unaware that far beyond the fence line a pair of headlights flickered in the shadows, watching and waiting. The war was not done, but neither was she. The night after the courthouse hearing draped itself over the ranch like a protective blanket, a darkness not of fear but of recovery. Yet Amara did not sleep. She lay awake in her childhood bedroom, staring at a ceiling still covered in faint stars her father had painted with glow-in-the-dark stickers when she was small. They had once filled her with wild dreams of exploring far-off galaxies. Now they reminded her of a father who saw possibility even in cracked paint and leaking roofs, a man who believed the future could still shine. Morning arrived quietly. No alarms blared. No hurried footsteps stormed the property. The air outside hummed with cicadas and a breeze that whispered over the fields, rustling tall grass like a chorus of applause. It was almost peaceful, if not for the lingering knowledge that someone out there still wanted to crush everything she had reclaimed. Sage returned early, carrying provisions for breakfast and a quiet confidence that buoyed Amara when her nerves attempted to shake her resolve. Lydia arrived an hour later in freshly pressed clothes and a stack of papers thicker than a Bible. The judge ordered a comprehensive investigation, she said as she stepped inside, her voice brightened by victory. We'll need to prepare every detail. The corporation will try to bury this again. Amara nodded, feeling that familiar dual surge of excitement and fear. The battle ahead was still long, but this, standing in her family's kitchen with allies, felt like the first sunrise after a brutal storm. The day unfolded in a blur of organization and strategy. Contractors hired by the co-op began arriving at the ranch. Trucks backed into the driveway, workers stepping out with tools in hand, ready to repair the house and barns. Some were familiar faces, old neighbors who once knew her father. Others were new, members of the growing coalition formed to protect the returning farms. Every hammer strike and board nailed into place sounded like a heartbeat, restoring rhythm to land that had been gasping for too long. Amara watched them work with awe. What had once been a forgotten plot, a symbol of loss, now sprouted the early signs of rebirth. Sage pointed out areas to reinforce, speaking with the natural authority of someone who had served this land far longer than she ever had. His voice, low and sure, guided the workers to replace rotted beams, patch up walls, and plan the reopening of the ranch's fields. This place is coming alive again, he told her as they surveyed the progress. Your father would have been proud. The compliment hit her with surprising force. She blinked away the sting in her eyes and nodded, unable to speak through the swell of emotion. She took a long look at the sprawling acreage, once choked with neglect, now slowly blooming with purpose, and for the first time in years, she felt grounded in a way the city never offered. Lydia gathered the group inside the newly tidied living room to share updates. The injunction had emboldened those who'd suffered quietly under the corporation's thumb. Phone calls poured in from landowners across the county wanting to join the fight. Local journalists reached out, eager to cover the story. A regional news network requested an interview. You're becoming the face of something bigger than this ranch, Lydia said, her dark eyes burning with conviction. This is a historic reckoning. Amara wasn't entirely sure how she felt about that. She hadn't asked to be a symbol, but she thought of the threats made against her, the damage to the ranch, the cruelty masked behind legal paperwork. She thought of her father, burying the safe in desperation, clinging to hope that someone, she, would pick up the torch before it went out. If becoming the face of justice was the price she had to pay, then she would wear the burden proudly. Evening approached with a quiet warmth. Workers left with promises to return at dawn. Lydia departed with a trunk full of evidence copies for filing the next morning. Sage stayed behind, though he lingered on the porch as if uncertain whether to enter. Things have changed fast, he said, watching the sun dip into the horizon like a burning coin. This land, it has a pulse again. It always did, Amara replied. We just stopped listening. Sage looked at her, his expression softening. Your father never stopped. I know that now, she whispered. They both turned their eyes to the barn, where new planks shone brighter than the old ones. It looked different, reborn, just like the rest of the ranch. Later, when the sky darkened fully and Sage said goodnight, Amara remained outside, stepping toward the barn with slow, deliberate steps. The night air cooled her skin. The scent of sawdust and fresh earth mixed with faint traces of motor oil, smells of restoration. Inside, the barn felt bigger than before. Clean sweep marks formed wide arcs across the floor, wooden boards sturdy under her shifting weight. She approached the place where the safe had been buried and knelt, placing her palm against the ground. Her father's perseverance lived in every nail he hammered, every record he saved, every breath he refused to lose. His legacy was not the silver in that safe, but the proof of dignity he fought to protect. She stood again and wandered through the aisles of restored stalls. The past here wasn't haunting, it was guiding. When she exited into the moonlight, she paused beneath the stars. She remembered how her father once pointed upward and told her that every star was a memory of those who came before, every ancestor who refused to fade. Tonight, she felt them watching, rooting for her. Back at the house, she entered the living room where the ransack had once brought chaos. Now it was decluttered, repaired, hopeful again. On the main table lay a final item she hadn't noticed before. An old envelope, sealed and worn thin from years of being handled. Her father had written one word on the front: Amara. Her heart leapt into her throat as she tore the seal slowly, carefully. Inside, she found a single sheet of lined paper covered in her father's familiar handwriting. The ink wavered slightly, as if his hand had not been steady in the final days he wrote it. "My little star," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then you came home, just like I always knew you would. I didn't want this fight for you. I wanted you to live free, unburdened by the weight this land placed on my shoulders. But I also knew the truth. This land is not a burden. It is a gift, one that our family paid for with sweat, love, and sacrifice. I fought as long as I could so you wouldn't have to. But if fate put the battle in your hands, I know you will win it. Not because you are stronger than me, but because you are the reason I fought at all. Finish what I began, and don't forget that you were always my brightest dream. Love, Dad." Tears fell silently, blotting the edges of the page. Amara pressed the letter to her chest, feeling the echo of his heartbeat beneath her own. He had believed in her even when she doubted herself. He had believed that the land deserved to stay in the hands of the families who nurtured it. And now she believed too. She wiped her eyes and stepped outside again, needing to feel the open air. The moon lit the ranch in silver, a fitting blessing for a place that had once harbored silver beneath the soil as a quiet secret. The wind carried the low sound of laughter from down the road, where neighbors celebrated, energized by their newfound hope. She could almost imagine her father leaning against the porch railing beside her, smiling softly, his boots dusty, his shoulders finely lighter. The ranch would not fall. The families would not disappear. The stolen stories would return home. A rustle in the grass down by the fence caught her attention. 2 headlights flickered into view, then retreated, someone watching again from afar. The threat was still out there, patient and vengeful, but it no longer paralyzed her. Amara stood tall, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Let them watch. They would soon witness what it meant for the truth to rise. She turned and locked the front door behind her. Before heading to bed, she pinned her father's letter to the refrigerator, where she would see it every morning and remember what she was fighting for. Tomorrow, more families would arrive. Tomorrow, plans would strengthen and lawsuits multiply. Tomorrow, the land would speak louder with every step reclaimed by those who belonged to it. Tonight, she allowed herself to breathe deeply and believe. The stars above seemed to glow brighter, as if each one shifted closer to Earth, no longer distant, no longer indifferent. They witnessed the rebirth of the ranch and the resurgence of a legacy that would not be silenced. The war ahead still stretched long and dark, but for the first time in a long time, Amara Jackson did not fear the dark. She was a light her father left behind, and she was ready to burn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now and hit the bell to follow every twist in these incredible stories. Watch the next video on your screen to uncover more shocking secrets and unbelievable discoveries. Share this video with friends and see what they would do in situations like this. You won't believe how real these stories get.